Nous arrivons dans l'air, nous connaissons, puis nous attendons résultat élection américaine, nous commençons à dérouler par mon site et nous sur channel, par nous en ZULMAR TV, côté nous apprêter là pour nous capables à l'informer nous sur question élection, qu'a fait par mon site pour nous capables de porter toute dernière information pour nous et nous connaissons en pile nous besoin qu'on ait qui ça qu'a dit par mon site dans question élection et channel élection. C'est ZULMAR TV, c'est lui-même qui va le côté élection pour nous. La caille nous, côté nous va arriver à comprendre tout ça qu'a fait là, sans manquer Timoso, parce que nous-mêmes nous là, pour nous capables d'informer nous et faire nous comprendre exactement qui ça, qui gagne, pas bon, ici, dans question élection. Et nous toujours prêts pour nous capables de faire nous compte ça qui a passé et porter dernière information pour nous. Parce que nous-mêmes, capitaine, nous là, et nous allons faire ça ensemble avec nous, nous avons demandé nous, les amis, nous, parler ensemble avec eux, dire channel élection li online, côté, c'est là nous allons comprendre exactement ça qui a passé par le site là, actuellement là, dans l'état de la Floride. C'est élection et mi-mandat que nous tous attendons. Que pour nous là, nous-mêmes nous là pour nous capables de porter expérience ça pour nous. Et avec ça, nous allons faire tous les amis nous, ouais, ça qui a passé par ici. Je demande nous, Shirley, vous voyez tous les amis nous, vous voyez tous les amis nous, comme ça pour nous capables de connaître le résultat élection. Et moi-même, moi là, c'est ça que je vais faire pour nous là. Nous allons porter le résultat élection pour nous parce qu'en pile, nous avons besoin de connaître ça qui a passé. Par ici, et on connaît nous-mêmes, c'est chaîne, c'est radio nous, c'est télévision nous, Fili, Zami nous, Colson ZULMAR, qui gagne expérience avec nous, qui va le porter pour nous là, côté nous tout a bien chance pour nous capables de comprendre exactement politique américaine, c'est nous là. Et nous allons faire ça pour nous. Nous demandé nous, suivez nous, partagez, voyez les amis nous, pas quitter 15 amis nous, rester sans ou pas connaître, parce que c'est seule façon pour nous faire l'autre monde gain connaissance ça qui gagne là pas bon ici. Dès que nous gain connaissance et nous-mêmes nous sommes capables de travailler ensemble avec eux et à pas arriver online avec nous écoute parce que nous pas quitter connaissance passée. C'est que faut nous tout connaître. Et nous connaissons élection nous dans mi-mandat. Fait mi-mandat, c'est élection mi-mandat côté tout le monde et nous capable dire aux États-Unis, je dis à là, fait dans élection yoye ou même tout le monde connaît tout ou dans élection. C'est ça qui intéresse ou. C'est comme ça qu'a passé par Boycid et nous-mêmes nous fait et n'a toujours fait pour nous capables aider au comprendre l'élection et c'est seule façon ou même l'autre contre l'autre monde pour capable parler sans problème. Et n'a dit nous connaissons élection, c'est élection pas nous lié et c'est ça qui gagne. Et nous élection américaine fait élection nous là nous dans élection générale. Et ça m'a porté explication ça pour nous parce que grand pile monde qui toujours poser une question ça qui les fait élection par ici. Élection générale aux États-Unis faite 1er mardi après 1er lundi dans mois novembre. Je prends encore pour nous. Élection faite 1er mardi après 1er lundi dans mois novembre. C'est là ça yo fait élection générale par ici. Question ça nous répondre et si gen l'autre monde qui gen l'autre question nous prêt tout pour nous capable répondre question tout le monde nous capable voyer question pour nous et dans live là comme ça n'a répondre pour nous et n'a toujours capable avancer ensemble avec nous. Faites-en mot, mettez-en mot au courant. Mettez-en mot au courant parce que nous live nous bral commenter ensemble résultat élection ensemble avec nous. Sans nous-mêmes, nous connaissons nous pas capables de faire élection. Et avec nous, nous sommes capables de faire l'ensemble. Et comme ça, nous tous sommes au courant de ça qu'a fait là. C'est élection nous liées. Il faut que nous tous connaissions et pour nous tous participer là-dedans. C'est ça, nous-mêmes, nous là. Et nous fait pour nous. C'est télévision, nous. Il faut que nous partagions là avec nous. Il faut que nous voyons toutes les amis nous. Comme ça, pour être capable de connaître ça qui a passé là aux États-Unis. Et nous allons entrer. Nous allons commencer à faire commentaires sur l'élection. Nous pas commencer trop fort. Nous allons commencer, j'aime nous dire à tout petit, pour nous capables d'aider nous entrer là-dedans. C'est ça nous allons faire. Nous allons faire tout petit. Pour pendant un moment, les résultats vont venir. Et puis nous-mêmes tout, nous allons gagner les résultats. Et comment ça y est, pour l'instant, pendant qu'on a parlé avant là. Nous connaissons chambre représentant, c'est toute élection nette qu'a fait. Tout député va dans l'élection. Il y a élection sénateur lui-même qui a 34 sénateurs qui en course. Et 34 sénateurs, ça y est, majorité là, c'est républicain, poste pas qui dans bataille. Mais nous connaissons tout, il y a un pile poste même là dans la bataille. Et le système n'est pas bon ici, il y a un côté, il y a un candidat, c'est lui qui a toujours gagné. Quel que soit Jean Rivière. Mais il y a un côté tout, bagay yo tight. Nous allons laisser comprendre ça avec nous pour nous arriver à comprendre. Mais nous avons un pile résultat tout sur l'état de la Floride parce que nous connaissons un pile dans le monde qui a toujours besoin de connaître qui ça a passé dans l'état de la Floride, comment la Floride lui-même, ouais, élection pas bon ici, comment eux-mêmes ils prennent. Et élection pas bon ici dans l'état, c'est élection pas nous lié et nous toujours prêts pour nous capables de comprendre l'élection. Et moi-même qui là, nous allons regarder les résultats ensemble avec nous, comment les résultats apporté et nous besoin au cours. Et nous disons encore, c'est élection générale, c'est élection mi-mandat que presque tout le monde toujours intéressé ensemble avec élection ça. N'a parlé en général et en même temps tout, n'a local tout, parce que mon local tout besoin comme ça qu'a passé bon la caillou pendant nous-mêmes. N'a pas résultat, n'a commenté résultat et l'autre moun tout après tout pour yo capable connaître ça passé parce que nous besoin connaître résultat. Et moi-même premier côté m'aller dans commissionnaire agriculture là pour me capable ba nous une idée comment ça est pour qui raison me faut appeler commissionnaire agriculture là dans l'état de la Floride là parce que ça livre vraiment concerne nous. Nous gagnons dans l'état de la Floride là côté nous te gagnons candidat républicain qui c'est ancien président Sénat qui c'est Wilton Simpson, les mêmes qui gagnent ça nous capable de à environ il gagne 3 838 000 moun 865 qui gagne un rapporté pour lui qui ballon pourcentage 58,51% et nous gagnons candidat démocrate là Naomi Esther Blemure les mêmes qui gagne en rentrée 2 721 725 qui ballon pourcentage de 41,49%. C'est comme ça résultat est pour l'instant pour Naomi pas bon ici que nous-mêmes n'a suivi et au moment opportun n'a pas comme ça de gagner comment nous-mêmes pour nous capables aller et nous sorti dans Naomi nous aller dans gouverneur c'est nous te voulons faire un zoom sur Naomi Esther Blemure qui c'est candidat communauté haïtienne dans tout. On regarde comment ça est pour gouverneur. Et Jean Bagay a marché là dans la pouvoir pour gouverneur. Nous gagnons et Ron DeSantis lui-même ensemble avec Nunez qui fait lieutenant général lieutenant li. Yo gagné 3 920 385 voix qui ballon pourcentage 58,45%. Nous gagnons Charlie Chris qui gagne comme lieutenant li Hernandez li à 2 743 403 voix qui ballon pourcentage de 40,9%. Et nous gagnons Ross qui gagne comme lieutenant Roha, lui-même qui c'est un libertarien qui gagne 16 521 voix qui gagne un pourcentage 0,25%. Et enfin, nous gagnons Jiménez qui gagne comme lieutenant, c'est Gibson, c'est un indépendant, 27 104 voix qui bat au pourcentage 0,4%. C'est comme ça, ça y est, pas bon ici, dans la question élection. Et nous connaissons tout, parfois tout, il y a d'autres qui les moins, et si nous, pendant moi-même, ma parlé à, répondre au téléphone, n'a pesquisé nous, parce que toute entrée, en dedans, travail là, parce que il y a pile monde qui a contacté nous. On nous aller pour Sénat. Pour Sénat, ça nous les sénateurs US Senate. Tu moi comment ça est pour US Senate? Est-ce que comment ça est? Nous Marco Rubio, lui-même, il est en rapporté pour lui 3 800 526 voix. Il a un pourcentage de 56,83%. Valdamine, comme démocrate, il a rapporté pour lui 2 823 640, il a un pourcentage 42,13%. Et l'autre monde qui vient derrière, nous avons Denis Missigoy, lui-même qui a 27 367 voix, qui a un pourcentage de 41. Nous avons Steven Grant, un NPA, c'est ancien magistrat Boynton Beach, qui gagne 27 400 voix, il a un pourcentage de 0,41%. Gagne Toran T. N. Nguyen, c'est un NPA tout, il a 14 886 voix, il a un pourcentage 0,22%. Et l'autre monde, il peut rapporter un pour le concours ou l'OMA, et PT, pour qu'on ait rapporté pour lui. Nous avons Edouard Agré, un pour rapporter pour lui. Nous avons Howard Knipper, un pour rapporter pour lui. Nous avons Moses Koalex, un pour rapporter pour moun sa yo pour question sénateur États-Unis. On a regardé comment chambre représentant pour l'instant, parce que ça est important, en pile dans nous besoin qu'on ait. Nous allons aller dans la chambre représentant pour l'État de la Floride. Nous allons nous soupçon comment ça y est, pas bon ici. Et pour district 1 qui gagne Matt Gaetz, qui sont républicains, ils ont rapporté pour lui 112 325 voix, qui bat un pourcentage 64,63%. Et aujourd'hui, Rebecca Jones, démocrate, qui fait 61 485 voix, qui bat un pourcentage 35,37%. Nous partons pour district DA. District DA qui gagne Neil Zone, républicain, 152 629 voix, il y a un pourcentage 58,22%. Nous avons Al Lawson, démocrate, qui fait 106 544 voix, qui bat un pourcentage 41,78%. Et Al Lawson, ça a mal voulu, c'est démocrate, c'est monsieur, c'est lui-même qui a position dans le mouvement pendant qu'on a parlé là. C'est lui-même, c'est un représentatif et dans l'US, mais tandis que les sous route pour lui perdre poste là, pas bon ici. Nous sortons là, nous descendons, nous allons dans le district 3. District 3, comment lié? Nous regardez-vous nous, dans le district 3, nous avons 4 Kamak, républicains, 141 609 voix, qui ont un pourcentage 61,35%. Daniel Ark, démocrate, 86 494 voix, qui bat un pourcentage 37,40%. Et nous avons Linda Brooks, un indépendant, qui fait 2728 voix, qui bat un pourcentage 1,18%. 78%. Ça veut dire pendant 3, ça y est là, républicain a mené. Nous pour aller dans le district 4 là. District 4 là, nous gagnons Aaron Bin, républicain. 155 966 voix. Le gros pourcentage de 60,43%. Lachanda Aloe, démocrate, 102 144 voix, qui ballon pourcentage 39,57%. Et Gary Lee Conis, lui-même, en un poco, dit pour lui, ça veut dire qu'il fait 0 voix, 0%, lui semblait apporter lampe, nan rara, le yo gan. Si nous allons pour congrès toujours dans le district 6, c'est Michael Watts, républicain, 196 163 voix, Libanon pourcentage 74,13%, démocrate Joseph Annons, libertarien, 68 467 voix, bagay yo en faveur républicain, n'a regardé, kounye là, nous font sauter pour moi côté, bah yo font tomber pour républicain yo. Dans le district 9 là, Scotty Moore, républicain, 88 471 voix, démocrate là, Darren Soto, 100 488 voix. Bon, ici, dans le district 9 là, il y a une chance pour démocrate là, il est mené. On regarde le district 10 là, district 10 là tout, démocrate a contrôlé là tout, nous avons Calvin Wenbich, républicain, 75 786 voix. Maxwell Alejandro Foch, démocrate, 112 236 voix, 58,78%. Ça veut dire, nous avons sous 10, démocrates ont 2, républicains ont 8. Nous avons gardé pour nous 11. 9 républicains, 12, 10 républicains, 13, ça fait 13 républicains, ça fait 11 républicains, 14 c'est démocrate, ça fait 11, 3, 15, bah nous 12, 3, 16, bah nous 13, 3, 17, bah nous 14, 3, 18, bah nous 15, 3, 19, bah nous 16, 3, 20, bah nous 16, 4, 21, bah nous et 21, bah nous 16, non 17, 4, non 17, 21, Sheila, cher Phyllis Macomic, jeune haïtienne ça, il fait 107 103 voix, le bon pourcentage de 73,79%. On regarde pour nous, dans 28 là, il y a 4 démocrates, dans 21 et 16 républicains, 21, 17 républicains, 22, 5 démocrates, 17 républicains, 23, 6 démocrates, 17 républicains, la démocratie du succès au bagay, nous gagnons et nous avons essayé de reprendre pour nous commencer, on nous va répartir encore, nous avons commencé dans 28 républicains, 2, bon, qui t'aime régler démocratie comme il paraît petit, démocratie, 1 démocrate, 2 démocrates, 3 démocrates, 4 démocrates, 5 démocrates, 5 démocrates, 5 démocrates, 6 démocrates, 6. Non, 28 là, il y a 6 démocrates cap mené, il y a 22 démocrates, il y a 22 républicains. 22 à 6. C'est comme ça va là pour l'État de la Floride, non, question élection là, pas bon ici. Bagay yo pas marché trop bien pour ça n'a pris les démocrates n'a regardé pour nous voir comment ça y est mes amis mes amis. Ok. Et nous allons aller, nous allons chercher l'autre position. Côté, nous guettons checker, nous avons gouverné à grand pile chance pour ces républicains liés dans l'État de la Floride. Avec l'État de la Floride, Jean Mounio fait État, il paraît qu'en un État républicain. Que nous pas comprendre ça qui a passé là comme ça. Et nous allons aller dans l'attorney général là, nous allons regarder comment ça est pour Ayala. Ashley Moody lui-même, il presque assuré le résultat. 59%, 99%, il presque 60%. Tu me regardes Chief Finance Officer, parce que nous connaissons nous-mêmes, regarder tout côté. Chief Finance Officer, Jimmy Petronis, 4 35 839 voix, 58,83%. Et Adam Attersley, démocrate, 2 824 081%. Tu me retournes dans la commission d'agriculture, parce que ça fait pas mieux, moi, je vais me regarder pour moi comment ça est pour lui. Bagay yo pas facile, bagay yo pas facile, bagay yo pas facile. Et on DeSantis presque crié victoire. Mais n'a suivre. Nous sortis sous le plan et ça nous relève state la net. Nous sautons garder tout bagay sous state la pour nous. Nous allons faire un coup d'œil tout sous local yo, nous allons essayer de prendre quelques élections qui gagnent dans quelques zones. Quand nous avons Palm Beach County, nous allons essayer de regarder comment ça y est dans Palm Beach County, parce que c'est important pour nous connaître ça. Nous avons cherché plusieurs counties, nous allons checker les résultats pour nous, parce qu'il faut que nous portions les résultats pour la communauté qui attend nous. Nous avons regardé un bagage, nous allons entrer dans Palm Beach County, nous allons chercher le school board. School board là qui est important. School board là qui est vraiment important pour nous. Parce que les regarder dans Palm Beach County là ouais pour Valdaming fait petit crack bois ça yo il pas faisable, c'est county démocrate lié Valdaming de fait plus que ça qu'il fait là. Ils sont county démocrate. Parce que le regard dans Palm Beach County, on DeSantis avant Charlie Chris, yo county démocrate. C'est un bagage qui était inaperçu, nous pas fini comprendre ça même. Comment fait ça arriver? Et commissionnaire agriculture là, même bagage. Démocrate dans Palm Beach County, Badba. Et Bobby Powell, pour ça nous capable de state Senate, district 24, lui à 55,43%. Et nous avons Eric Enkner, républicain, 44,57%. Et nous allons aller là, nous allons aller plus bas, ça c'est représentatif, ça nous a antigen comprendre plus rapide. C'est regarder pour moi comment school board ça important pour nous pas ici school board nous a regarder pour nous. On connaît pile dans nous besoin qu'on qui ça a fait. Ici Supreme Court. Élection pas oublier nous à suivre résultat élection américaine qui en pile dans nous concerner quel que soit côté à travers le monde ou ta aimé qui ça passe dans l'élection américaine. Si il y a une question tout nous a toujours poser nos questions pour nous répondre questions pour nous et comme ça on est capable d'avancer. Et nous avons Edwin Ferguson lui-même qui gagne 52,54% avec environ 20 720 voix. Nous avons Corey Michael Smith 47,46% qui fait 18 713 voix. Et retourne 10,5 qui peut reporter. Bon 10,5 qui peut reporter. Au moment que ça a reporté, n'a capable comprendre pour Palm Beach Soil and Water Conservation District 5 là et Charry Portnoy lui-même il fait 47,54%, 212 719 voix et Eva Web 52,46%, 234 771 voix. Et nous poursuivons toujours notre School Board District 7, côté School Board District 6, qui est important pour nous. Et Masha Andrew, 56,73%, 38 096 voix. Jennifer Shore, 43,27%, 29 064 voix. C'est comme ça, ça y est, pour School Board. Et nous allons regarder dans l'amendement, qui était mal regardé, qui était quitté amendement, qui était mal regardé bon nom pour nous. On va parce qu'il a posé nos questions sur bon nom. Et bon nom, il y a 261 112 personnes qui votent, il y a 55,16%. Against bon nom, 212 219 et 1 qui va un pourcentage 44,84%. C'est comme ça, ça y est. Pour bon nom, il y a de chance pour lui passer. Et nous-mêmes, nous là, nous suivons ça pour nous capables ouais comment ça nous a marché, comment bagaille a marché pas bon ici. On voit dans la cour Miami, même dans la commission de district DA, pas oublier. Et Marlène Bastien lui-même, il y a une chance pour le remporter victoire sous confrère nous Philippe bien-aimé. Nous pas de problème si nous avons des questions, voyez questions nous-mêmes nous là, nous prenons question et nous sommes capables de répondre pour nous. C'est notre travail sur l'élection, c'est l'élection pas nous lier, faut que nous connaissions ça qui a passé pas bon ici. Élection américaine. Nous toutes là, nous avons suivi l'élection. Après, nous avons besoin de connaître qui ça a fait. Après, nous avons un mouvement des élections. C'est élection pas nous. Nous avons demandé nous pas débrancher, rester là, comme ça pour nous capables de tout ça cap dit dans l'élection. Parce qu'il faut que nous connaissions comment bagaille pas bon ici. Et nous connaissons et surtout au niveau mi-terme, ça nous capable parler mi-terme, c'est la cause de chita, c'est White House là, en pile monde va besoin qu'on ait qui monde qui a porté couler dans White House là, est-ce que ça bon pour président, nous pas connaît si la bon s'il pas bon rouler, mais la seule différence que nous même nous là nous suivre pour nous capables de exactement comment ça y est. Jean Abdoula, fait tout l'autre monde partager live là avec nous, faisant nous suivre nous pour nous capables commenter ensemble résultat élection américaine qui c'est élection par nous pas doué rester chita sans nous-mêmes nous pas connaître exactement ça qui a passé pas bon ici dans l'élection États-Unis que nous tous nous besoin connaître qui ça cap dit parce que nous-mêmes nous là pour nous capable porter message pour vous faut comprendre ça qu'a fait là parce qu'il est important pour nous connaître comment l'élection est et à suivre ZULMAR TV voyez ça nous les partager Shirley ou même qui faut qu'on subscribe si vous pas ensemble avec nous parce que nous voulons porter toute bagaille pour nous pas d'ailleurs mon petit rien on nous fait ça comme ça pour nous capable bien comprendre l'élection parce qu'il est important pour nous comprendre l'élection américaine c'est seule façon pour nous capable faire l'autre monde au courant ça qui a passé par bon ici dans la question élection. Et nous-mêmes, nous là, nous sommes toujours là pour nous capables porter le bout et fait nous confiance. Avec ça là, ou pas bien problème, ou capable gain résultat élection ou nan men ou koto chita information yo ap vinn jwen nou et nous même n'a fait le et dégage parce que faut que nous porter élection la caillou pour ou et m'gonne pile nan nous la besoin connaître et m'a prend petit break pendant m'a prend break là m'a passé m'a fait nous suivre ça qu'a passé comment l'autre monde
all day at a polling location in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. It's a democratically leaning in some ways, but also a lot of Republicans in that area. The top issue there was the school board issue. So we saw people outside the polling location with a number of signs. They were all related to education. So I tell you that there's a lot of issues on the ballot here and a lot of issues that voters are dealing with.
Let's remind the voters, the viewers as well, that of course Governor Whitmer was the target of a kidnapping attempt about a year and a half ago or so. In the meantime, Tudor Dixon supported by President Trump, as you've said, and also President Biden in support of Whitmer. To what extent are those two, at the moment, kind of polarizing figures in American politics? How much is that driving the voter interest there in Michigan?
It's a great question, and really it just even answer that question because here in Michigan, what we're seeing Michigan officials say is higher than expected turnout. We even have the Michigan Secretary of State, who's also running for re-election, say that this state could actually hit a historic record for voter turnout as it relates to midterms. And a lot of that, I think, is about the fact that you're hearing the name Trump a lot. Either Democrats saying we don't like anyone who's backed by Trump, or Republicans saying we're very excited about him. And the former president, he's talking about Michigan today. He was tweeting, or he was posting online at the social media site that he owns. He was saying that there were absentee ballot voting issues in Detroit. The Michigan Secretary of State quickly refuted that and said, absolutely not, that's not true. She told him, stop spreading lies and please don't have anybody thinking about political violence here in the state. So a lot here.
Yamiche, thank you very much. We'll have much more real-time results and analysis through the night. We pause now to rejoin NBC special coverage, Decision 2022.
Welcome back to our live coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. It's 9 p.m. here on the East Coast, and the polls have just closed in 14 states all across the country.
Okay, so let's get to it. We've got a lot of results to read to you, and we'll start the Arizona Senate race. This is a very tight race, and stop me if you've heard this before. It is too early to call. We will keep an eye on that. Same story in Wisconsin, a Senate race. Ron Johnson trying to hold on. Mandela Barnes, the challenger there, too early to call.
We'll continue with the theme, too early to call, in Colorado. Right now in the Senate race there, Michael Bennet, the Democrat, over Joe O'Dea. In Iowa Senate, too early to call. Chuck Grassley against the Democrat Michael Franken.
Let's go to Kansas, and we can project that Jerry Moran will return to the United States Senate. There's a big governor's race going on there in Kansas. We don't have any results there yet to report. And in Louisiana, too early to call. They've got the 50% rule here, so we'll keep an eye on that one. John Kennedy trying to hang on to his Senate seat.
In the New York Senate race, NBC projects that Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, will retain his seat. And let's look at North Dakota numbers. Too early to call out of North Dakota.
South Dakota, we do have a projected winner. Senator John Thune returns to office. And let's see where we stack up in the Senate at this hour. It's a 50-50 split. And right now we can report Democrats have 38 seats. Republicans have 39. We'll continue to keep our eye on the big picture there.
Let's move over to the governor's races now, starting in Arizona. Too early to call that hard-fought race between Democrat Katie Hobbs and Carrie Lake, the former news anchor. In Kansas, too early to call, but you can see the Democratic incumbent way out in front right now. Michigan's governor's race, too early to call.
Wisconsin governor's race, too early to call right now. Tony Evers, the incumbent, up against Tim Michels. In Colorado, it's too early as well. Jared Polis looking for another term against Heidi Ganahl. And we'll go to Minnesota. Oh, governor of Iowa, sorry. Kim Reynolds, too early to call. She's the incumbent there.
And Minnesota, too early to call that race between incumbent Tim Walz, Democrat, and Scott Jensen. And we're looking at the Nebraska, too early to call. This is Nebraska governor's race. Carol Blood, the Democrat, versus Jim Pillen. Too early to call in that race. New Mexico governor, also too early to call.
Let's go to New York. This is a race that tightened up in the late stages. We'll see. It's too early to call right now whether Kathy Hochul can get her first full term as governor. In South Dakota, the governor's race too early to call, but Kristi Noem, who's become a national Republican, some talk about her as a potential presidential candidate. She is leading at this hour. In Texas, it is too early to call, but Greg Abbott is leading at this hour, looking to get another term there.
In the Wyoming governor's race, too early to call. Mark Gordon, the Republican incumbent, right now in front. Rhode Island governor, it's projected winner Daniel McKee. The Democratic incumbent will win another term. And the Vermont governor's race, Phil Scott, the Republican, the projected winner over Brenda Siegel. He handedly defeats her.
Okay, so we have talked a lot about some of the issues driving this election. The economy, rising prices, inflation, those are clearly top of mind for so many voters. We want to talk to Stephanie Ruhle. She's NBC's senior business analyst, host of the 11th Hour on MSNBC. Steph, I have to say, one of the key indicators, consumer confidence. We have seen that number drop at a level not seen in decades, perhaps matching the inflation we had not seen in decades.
Savannah, it's really interesting because people vote based on how they feel, and consumer confidence is obviously about feeling. But when you dig into the economy, it's not all bad. What it is complicated, right? If you take a snapshot of the economy tonight, election night tonight, in 2020 and in 2018, it's a mixed picture. Now, at the top line, we know this. Inflation is higher tonight. Food prices, gas prices, all higher. Mortgage rates, obviously a lot higher because the Fed has raised rates trying to slow inflation. But here's the thing. That's not the whole picture. We know that unemployment today is very low. We're back to pre-pandemic levels. Huge positive. If you want a job, there is one available in this country. But for Democrats, that's really difficult to message, right? You can't fit inflation's bad, but it's much worse in other countries on a bumper sticker. So while Democrats haven't said much, Republicans have been disciplined and relentless, hammering their economic message over and over. They outspent Democrats 5-1 on economic ads. And so when you factor all of that in, that people are talking about economic woes at their kitchen tables, Republicans are filling the airwaves with their messaging, and Democrats not saying much or not saying enough soon enough, it's no surprise that this is a big vulnerability for them.
Stephanie, have Republicans, though, laid out a plan, or have they just been effective in going after the bad economy and Democrats?
They have not laid out a plan at all. And that's actually what President Obama has kind of hammered home in his closing message, saying, hold on a second, they're not offering you something on the other side. And many of your social services, your Social Security, your Medicare, your Medicaid might get cut. But it was late for Democrats to message that. And it really goes back to the complication. You know, Hallie mentioned it in the last hour. She was talking to a small business owner in Georgia struggling. Georgia's economy is actually doing better than most other states. If you think about the Port of Savannah, the booming business it's seen in the last 2 years, huge. But that business owner she talked to was in the real estate business, the mortgage business. And we know real estate has gotten more difficult given mortgage rates. So it's just a tough message to get across, and easy for the party that's not in power to say, are you struggling? Is this difficult? And it is. You see it every time you go to the grocery store.
All right, Stephanie, thanks.
It reminds me of the 1992 campaign in the Clinton War Room with the famous sign, Andrea, it's the economy's stupid. And you know, honestly, for these elections, it so often is the economy that's the top issue for voters.
And it's inflation. And as the White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain, says, he looks at the gas prices every morning. And even though they've come down, they've not come down enough. And in our exit poll showed that by the voters, 52% trust Republicans to handle the economy. Only 44% trust Democrats to handle the economy. And 46% of the people in our exit poll said that their personal family financial situation is worse than it was 2 years ago. And this is the worst number that we've seen since the Great Recession. So that is a big shift. Look, inflation is the most important issue by far. And abortion, less so, but higher than we expected, at least according to the exit polls, crime much less so. But the Republicans have just been hammering Joe Biden on inflation, and Democrats are being punished for it.
Well, Hallie, I mean, a lot of analysts have said that Democrats didn't sufficiently answer the charges on the economy or on crime, that the sort of a deer in the headlights in terms of the crime attack, which has tightened up races in these last few weeks where they thought they weren't going to be as competitive.
Let me tell you, what I've heard from Democrats was exactly that issue, Savannah, when they were talking about places where they were nervous, feeling like Democrats were really put on defense by Republicans on the issue of crime kind of late in the game. And in key places like, for example, Pennsylvania. Look at Wisconsin, where that's been another key issue, too. So, yeah, crime right there sitting at number 3, by the way, tied for gun policy on issues that are important to voters. You know, inflation and crime, what they have in common, they're really tangible to people. Sometimes, like, you know, the 3 of us live in Washington. People sit there in the Beltway and they talk about things that are sort of esoteric. Everybody puts together a grocery budget, right? Everybody walks out of their home to go to their car or to school or whatever. You feel these issues in a really tangible way. You look at where Democrats are right now, more voters say President Biden's policies are hurting this country than helping, right? These are the headwinds that Democrats are facing, and we're seeing it in races across the country. Savannah, I know you're interested in the Kansas governor's race, which was too early to call right now, which makes sense, but you look at the Republican there, Derek Schmidt. He has tried to tie the incumbent governor, Laura Kelly, to President Biden in a big way. That's been a big issue in that race in a state that Donald Trump won by double digits. That is a reflection of what we're seeing in other key states around the country, too.
Well, governor's mansions could be switching hands in more than 30 states tonight, but one place where that won't happen is in New Hampshire, where incumbent Republican Governor Chris Sununu has been reelected, and he joins us now live. Governor, congratulations.
Well, thank you. Although I have to correct you, we don't have a governor's mansion in New Hampshire, but I appreciate the thought. We're having a great time here.
That is duly Well, Governor, I know you've been obviously...
Maybe they want to throw it in the budget.
Yeah, obviously you've been focused on your race tonight, and again, congratulations. But have you drawn anything from what you have seen so far on any of these races?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the turnout has been absolutely unbelievable. We're definitely going to break records for a midterm turnout here in New Hampshire. And as you guys have been discussing, that's economically driven. Folks are feeling a pinch at their homes when they're balancing a checkbook, trying to just pay a mortgage. And especially in New England, where energy prices are so high, fuel prices are high, it's getting colder. People are really feeling that double pinch, that double whammy, and they want to change. And you can't ask Washington to change and yet keep sending the same people back. So I think, again, a lot of these races are still too close to call on the federal side, but I think there's going to be a very positive red wave as the night goes along, not just here in New Hampshire, but across the country.
Well, you know, we have to ask you about the Senate race going on in your state. You know this state backwards and forwards, having just campaigned there. How do you feel about what's going to happen tonight? Do you think that General Don Bolduc, the Republican, will be able to defeat Maggie Hassan?
I think so. I mean, it is going to be a neck-and-neck race, probably not called late until the night. You're going to have a lot of the larger towns, the more conservative towns, come in very late, just because that's just the way it is. But they will count their votes, and we will get a winner. But it probably will be late into the night. And again, because that turnout was so high, we have same-day voter registration, which actually works as a decent process here in New Hampshire. So there's just a lot to tabulate and compile. But that's going to be neck-and-neck. And considering you have a General Bolduc who really spent very little money, was outspent 10 to 1 or something like that, but introduced himself to the state as an alternative, as an option, as someone who's going to fight for New Hampshire. That gives, I think, a lot of Republicans hope that he's going to bring it home.
Well, Governor, thanks for being with us. Good luck on that mansion.
He's at a bowling alley right now. Is that right, Governor? You're at a bowling alley? It's like, I mean...
We're doing it in New Hampshire style. We're axe throwing. We got a bowling alley. We got an arcade. We got horseshoes a little later on. We're going to be having a lot of fun. Very New Hampshire style. I know you guys are stuck in New York, and as usual, New Hampshire's having a lot more fun than New York. But you know,
we get the games here.
Well, enjoy.
Everybody's jealous. I guess it's a good time when your race gets called early and you're victorious. Governor Chris Sununu, thank you so much. Interesting to hear him talk about the New Hampshire Senate race, which, of course, has not been called yet. And that's a key issue. In fact, Chris Sununu did not endorse General Bolduc in the primary, right. Andrea.
He did not want him to win. He wanted the other candidate to win. And Democrats poured a lot of money in the primary into advertising, negative ads, trying to take down Bolduc. I mean, they were just going, they really made him a bigger deal than he was. calling him too extreme, but people did not think that he was extreme.
It's an interesting dynamic, and when we have another moment, we should talk about it because it's happened across the country where you have Democrats in these primaries often spending money and trying to prop up the more extreme candidate, hoping it would make for a better general election candidate for the Democrats to beat. Will it backfire? That question will be answered tonight. Coming up, we're going to dig into the race for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania and what voters think about the health challenges for Democratic candidate John Fetterman, who suffered a stroke right after the primary. We're back after this.
We're here to start conversation about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
As we come back, we've got another Senate race to project. It is in the state of North Dakota. And Hoeven is the projected winner, John Hoeven, over the Democratic challenger, Katrina Christensen.
A third term for Senator Hoeven, so let's see where we are. 40 Republican seats, 38 Democratic seats. It's going down to the wire. Let's go over to Tom Yamas, who's been looking at some of the exit polls, and we've got some out of Pennsylvania, a closely watched race, and for good reason. Tom, what are you seeing?
Yeah, a lot of interesting information. So voters in Pennsylvania had some real issues with their Senate candidates. That race, of course, the most expensive Senate race in the country, more than $145 million spent in ads there to define each candidate, and a lot of news coverage. As we know, a lot of that coverage was on John Fetterman's health. And so we asked voters coming out, voting here in these midterms, was John Fetterman in good enough health to...
Et nous retournons, m'konnaît en pile nan nou aptan, qui ça nous gagne pour nous là. Et quand nous bral entrer, nous retournons, pas oublier n'a suivre élection États-Unis, ça nous est mi-mandat, c'est lui-même qui n'a suivre là actuellement là. Côté nous connaît gagné environ 34 sénateurs qui dans course et ça va permettre pour connaît qui monde qui va remporter chambre non, qui est qui gagne et puis nous gagne chambre représentant tout et ça qui gagne. Mais actuellement là tout nous dans tout sorte nous bral entrer ça nous capable les dans quelques quartiers n'a pas entrer en dans Miami-Dade qui en pile monde connaît la gagne gros élection Miami-Dade. Nous n'a pas nous comment comportement mon yoy quand pour nous prend par exemple dans Miami-Dade et Marco Rubio lui-même la 4 millions 75 l'a bien mené dans Miami-Dade. Marco Rubio lui-même a bien fait ça dans Miami-Dade. L'a bien passé. Il y a quelques candidats ici dans Miami-Dade nous bral chercher pour nous. Et dans le district 28 la fin dans Miami, Jiménez, c'est lui-même qui faut remporter la victoire. Toujours dans Miami-Dade, Maria Elvira Salazar, républicain, c'est lui-même qui a une chance pour la représenter dans le district 27 là, Washington. Dans le district 26 là, gagné Mario Diaz Barra, républicain, c'est lui qui a une chance. Dans le district 24 là, Frederica Wilson, démocrate, c'est lui qui a une chance, 71% pour la représenter en dans là. Et Washington. On a regardé parce que nous avons plusieurs Haïtiens qui dans course en dans Miami. Et en dans Miami, il y a un pile Haïtien tout qui dans bataille. Capoué qui ça yo capoté, nous a cherché pour nous. N'a cherché Miami pour nous parce qu'il est important pour nous connaître qui ça County Miami a gagné non Jacoutli. Parce qu'il y a un county commissionnaire dans pile bataille qui est en dedans Miami. C'est ça vraiment important pour nous connaître parce qu'il y a un Haïtien qui dans course en dedans Miami. C'est ça yo. Nous-mêmes nous travaillons pour eux et en pile Haïtien commencer à retirer quoi yo, mettez yo dehors pour yo capable participer dans les élections américaine qui est important et c'est ça tout le monde a essayé de faire et nous-mêmes n'a toujours encouragé pour faire ça et parce que ça est important. District Miami sont des démocrates mais malheureusement démocrates ou presque tout poste qui gagne Miami incroyable, mais vrai. Ça pas facile pour les démocrates en dans Miami. Et nous pas comme ça passer. Et ben il pas trop bon pour démocrates dans l'état de la Floride, c'est tout. Les nous garder dans question congrès, nous gagné dans 28 là, gain chance pour eux gagner 22 là-dedans. Républicain a chance pour le prendre 22 pour le remettre 23 avec pour le remettre 23 avec démocrate qui pas bon même pour démocrate parce que ça nous pas arrivé on est ça passer à là mais nous même nous là n'a suivre parce qu'il faut que nous goûter information pour nous. Et n'a toujours suivi ça pour nous, on a regardé comment le gouverneur lui-même est toujours campé, j'aime t'a dit en bandant, qu'il a bien mené, il avec 58,97%, Charlie Chris 40,37%. Il dit 40 là presque cuit, pas bon ici. Plus passer 7 millions de monde qui ont rapporté qui voté dans l'élection ça nous capable de 7 223 544 qui voté puis tout dans question gouverneur commissionnaire agriculture il a rapporté 7 73 144 147 monde qui voté et Wilton Simpson la mené à 58,95%. Naomi, 41,05%. Que nous connaissons Wilton, lui-même, il a plus de 15 millions de dollars dans le et Naomi, même si c'était dans Goumen, pou te kapab rive an fè $100,000. Et nou ka kompren. Si Naomi te gen kob nan meni, il tap mette Wilson en défi. Nap suivre nous, et nous même nap là pour nous capable de parce que nous pourquoi dormir de temps à autre n'a venir là pour nous capable porter résultat pour parce que l'important pour nous connaître parce que si nous pas faire ça on pas privé connaître qui ça va passer par ici parce que faut qu'on connaisse faut qu'on comprenne et l'on comprenne on capable avancer plus bien et on comprendre exactement comment bagay yo yé c'est dans question élection yo et moun yo nan moun ki sorti al vote yo tan a out là nous capable di journée élection li pas trop mal parce que les nous prend al si tout nan pan et Florida à la choix on tan a out là on beaucoup monde aller on 36 000 935 000 monde al voter Baker on en 4 000 te regarder les grands ténors Boiswood lui-même te gain 186 568 monde jouer élection même qu'à voter Brevard 104 083 quand nous descend plus bas nous regarder les gros ténors Duval il y a beaucoup de monde qui allait 132 000 quand on dit Duval là grand pile monde on gros county et nous voit Hillsborough son l'autre gros county tout 152 600 cette monde est sorti aller nous va chercher Palm Beach Orange County tout ça nous connaît nos besoins Lake tout gombo ti monde qui sorti li 30 000 ça zone côté terrain cyclone nous va chercher Palm Beach pour nous Miami-Dade 230 074 qui sorti ça yo important Palm Beach même 193 963 jour élection avait dit jeudi qui vraiment ouais dit jour élection il rapporté 2 725 806 monde qui était sorti à voter dans jour élection ça veut dire n'a parlé jeudi là ça veut dire nous qu'a dit te gen plus passer moitié monde qui te en voter dans vote by mail avec nan early voting que en pile monde a suivre et chez pour Florida ba yo presque quit bagay yo presque quit nous connaît tout pôle yo gen tan fermé Florida pas gen pôle qui l'ouvrir encore tout pôle fermé égal c'est comme ça y est pour Florida ay des pôle yo fermé nous pas rien égal n'a suivre et puis nous même pour nous capable suivre et de temps à autre n'a font un petit coup de pied sur le plan international sur le plan national nationwide pour nous capable connaître exactement ça qu'a fait là parce que nous avons plusieurs l'autre côté n'a suivre et cap porter information pour nous en nous aller là pour nous comment ça est dans la Maryland.
Hiccup, actually. Republican Larry Hogan, term limited, not running again, so it was an open seat. And in this case, Dan Cox being a candidate in the primary that Larry Hogan, the Republican, did not support. And now we see Wes Moore cruising to victory
Democrats,
there.
though, paid for ads to get Cox is that nomination.
There's that issue again.
Right,
so
exactly.
that's a case where that strategy worked. We'll see how it plays out. Lots more to come. This is Decision 2022. Balance of Power on NBC.
Welcome back. I'm Tom Costello in Washington, D.C. We are continuing our special Decision 2022 coverage. Polls have now closed in Arizona, where two high-profile races are playing out. One for the governor between the Republican candidate, Kari Lake, she's a former local TV anchor, and Democrat Katie Hobbs. It's too early to call there. And the other one is for the Senate, of course, where the Democrat incumbent Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, is taking on Republican Blake Masters. Also too early to call at this hour. Let's bring in NBC's Vaughn Hilliard, who is in Scottsdale with the GOP candidates. Vaughn, let's start with the governor's race. Kari Lake has pushed the stolen election lie, while Hobbs has pushed back hard on those lies. You're an Arizona native. What are the voters telling you tonight?
Right. The Democratic Katie Hobbs, in fact, is Arizona Secretary of State who oversaw the 2020 election in which Donald Trump narrowly lost to Joe Biden. When you're looking here at this race, this is the question at play. It's a longtime conservative state, but folks in the state, especially independents and conservatives reticent to Donald Trump and his allies, showed that they were willing to vote for Democrats. In 2018, Kyrsten Sinema. In 2020, Democrat Mark Kelly and Joe Biden. The question is, are they willing to do it again in 2022? And when you're looking at this governor's race as well as the Senate race here, the big question is, where do these independents lie? This is ground zero for election denialism. Up and down that slate of GOP candidates, you're looking at candidates who have called for the decertification of the 2020 election. Now the question is that a high enough priority for voters to push back against Republicans this year?
All right, well, let's talk about that Senate seat. It's Kelly versus Masters. Kelly won the special election after John McCain died. Has he managed to build the support over the past 2 years to put him over the hump this year?
Right. Republican challenger Blake Masters has largely gone after Mark Kelly for voting almost in lockstep, essentially, with the Democratic White House and Democratic majorities in Congress. And contrasted that with Kyrsten Sinema, who took a little bit more of an approach in which she pushed back against some of the Democratic agenda items. But when you're looking at Mark Kelly, he is somebody who has garnered support here in the state. Of course, the husband of Gabby Giffords, and he has tried to make the case on a myriad of issues that he has represented Arizona independently. Blake Masters is heavily focused on the border. And in fact, I was just down there when he was campaigning on Friday, really highlighting the record number of migrants that have made their way into the United States. And this year, and he is trying to boost that GOP turnout. That's why you have seen him travel around the state here with the likes of Carrie Lake and those other Republican contenders. We should note the polls closed a half hour ago. Tom, we're waiting for that first batch of ballots to come out a half hour from now. And these votes are going to heavily skew Democratic. So when you look at the results, Democrats want to be quite significantly up because the expectation, much like in 2020 when Donald Trump closed the gap and almost overtook Joe Biden, you should expect a very similar thing. But this first batch may be anywhere from 70 to even 75% of the total ballots here. So we could know a lot about this race just a half hour from now, Tom.
A familiar scene, because we should remind the audience that Biden won Arizona by less than half a percentage point back in 2020. Vaughn, thank you very much. Vaughn Hilliard, who was there in Arizona. We're going to continue keeping a close eye on these races, much more throughout the night, and we're going to go back to NBC News special coverage. Decision 2022 and the balance of power. Stay with us.
Welcome back, 9:30 in the East. This is NBC's coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. At issue, the balance of power in the Senate and in the House.
And we've got some calls, or at least some characterizations of...
Yeah, let's go to Arizona. A lot of folks are watching this Senate race between Mark Kelly and Blake Masters. It is too early to call there. And the same story in Wisconsin. Ron Johnson looking for another term in the United States Senate up against Mandela Barnes. Too early to call there.
Both parties waiting to see which way this one will go. The Pennsylvania Senate race, that is still too early to call. Too early to call. Let's look at the Georgia Senate, one of the other big ones tonight that we're watching for potential switch in control of the Senate. The Georgia Senate, well, too early right now.
At some point, we ought to say too close. We're at 70%.
Well, we do have. We had too early and too close. We'll have
at this point, at 70%, it's hard to say too early at this point. We're getting into too close. Georgia Senate is too close to call.
Okay, you're the boss.
I'm not. There's others that make that decision, but we're probably off of the too early.
All right, let's get to Peter Alexander. He's at Dr. Oz campaign headquarters in Pennsylvania. How are they feeling tonight?
Well, right now they're still waiting for the numbers to come in right now, and they anticipate that this is going to be several days before they may know who the real winner here is. This would be a Democratic pickup if John Fetterman can win. The first-time candidate, Dr. Mehmet Oz, is hoping to put his name on the board tonight as well. The bottom line is that they feel fairly good about the trajectory of this race, the momentum the Oz campaign has had in recent days. The bottom line for Dr. Oz has been a focus on being a moderate. It's why he's invested so much time in what they call the collar counties, those 4 key counties just outside of Philadelphia, like where we are tonight in Bucks County. They are affluent and well-educated, and they're really what separates Pennsylvania's Philadelphia metro area that is so heavily Democratic from the more rural conservative areas further west throughout this state. What was notable, though, is that just this past weekend, Dr. Oz, despite his efforts to cast himself as a moderate, hosted a rally alongside the former President Donald Trump. And I think if he struggles tonight, there will be a lot of scrutiny about that decision here. But keep a real close eye on those Philadelphia suburbs over the course of this night. 283,000 votes. That's what separated Joe Biden from Donald Trump in those counties back in 2020. According to a top advisor to the Oz campaign, their goal tonight is to be about 40%. They know they need to get about 40% of the vote there. So keep a close eye on the numbers that come out of those counties. The bottom line is they think they're going to be at it for a while. Philadelphia, as we've noted, reinstated today, Savannah and Lester, a procedure that helps them prevent against any double votes. That means, in the words of the acting Secretary of State, they may be at this for the next few days. Back to you.
Yeah, but the pace of those results will certainly cause some anxiety.
One thing in the exits is right now, Dr. Oz is getting fewer of those white male non-college educated voters, or the white non-college educated voters, than Donald Trump got.
Okay. Interesting metric to watch there. Let's go to Wisconsin. Governor's race is tight there. We've got Shaquille Brewster on duty in Milwaukee. He's at the headquarters for the Republican in the race, Tim Michaels. Hi, Shaq.
Hi there, good evening. And you know, polls just closed about a half hour ago, so there's still a lot of vote to come in. But I've been talking with both campaigns, both party chairs, and it's almost as if they're reading from the same script. They say that they are feeling cautiously optimistic. Republicans saying that they've seen high turnout in their high population areas. Democrats saying they see high turnout and long lines in areas like Dane County and Milwaukee County. And they both say that it was the issues that drove their voters to the polls. And look, in Wisconsin, all of that can be true at once. This is a 50-50 state. If you look at the turnout in the past couple of statewide elections, 2020, 2016, 2018, you saw the electoral margins all under 25,000 votes. Both sides understand that this is going to come out to that election day turnout and who's able to edge out the other at the end of the day. And as we continue to watch these poll results come in, I want to give our viewers a warning in terms of what we see out of Milwaukee. I talked to the director of the Elections Commission there, and one thing that Milwaukee does is they collect all the absentee ballots at once, and then they submit them to the county, and that's when we get that result. So just like we saw in 2020, it is likely that in the highest population part of the state, we will not know a significant amount of that vote until later in the evening. The director says they expect that to come around midnight Eastern time. So a lot of vote to come, but you have both sides saying that a lot of people have been turning out, and they're both cautiously optimistic.
All right, Shaq, thank you so much. We have an important Senate race to call at this hour in Colorado. NBC News is projecting that Michael Bennet, the incumbent, will return to office. This is a very interesting result, perhaps an indication, Hallie, again, of the size of the red wave. This is one of those seats that, of course, Republicans were hoping to pick up. The Republican candidate there, Joe O'Dea, running as a moderate, and that race had tightened up.
I just talked to him a couple days ago, Joe O'Dea, the Republican candidate in this race. And you know what his biggest messaging was, Savannah? It was economy, economy, economy. I mean, he kept pivoting every question to hit on that. Clearly what he thought was going to be a successful strategy for him. But this is an interesting call. One of the key races that Democrats were watching.
So what worked for Bennett?
Yeah, I think if people thought if there was going to be a wipeout, this would be one of the canaries in the coal mine races.
But I talked to some Republicans who said, you know, Joe O'Dea went too far in attacking Trump. And he got Trump's attention. Trump attacked O'Dea.
He went after him, right.
Trump went after him,
right.
And that hurt some Republican support.
Depressed the Trump vote.
Depressed the Trump vote.
And he didn't regret it at all, right? He said he's his own man. That was his message. That was his key campaign message, that he was his own man here. And as Chuck points out, clearly that was a turnoff for some of the Republicans in that state.
So which maybe leads us to a conversation about election deniers on the ballot.
Since
tonight.
that was ceded from former President Trump in the 2020 race. This is a really important point that I think I'm glad we're talking about, because if you look at the races across the country, there are hundreds of people who are election deniers or election skeptics, including 17 candidates who are running for the Senate on the Republican side, who have questioned the legitimate results of the 2020 election. Will not say affirmatively that President Joe Biden won that office legitimately. In the governor's races, you've got 17 governors on the Republican side who are running, who are election deniers or skeptics. Let's talk about the Secretary of State races. I know that's not something we would typically be sitting here at a desk talking about in a midterm cycle. So important, because these are the positions that do the administration of elections wherever you live, in your state, in most states, right, along with the attorneys general. 10 of those Secretary of State positions are election deniers or election skeptics who are running. And here's why this matters, and let me give you one example here. There are 3 states where all 3 statewide races, governor, Secretary of State, and attorney general, the Republican candidates are election deniers or skeptics. 2 of those states are Arizona and Michigan, which will be key in 2024. If these are the candidates who end up winning, and we don't know right now where those races are, that could have a major impact on counting votes come 2024, because these are people who make key decisions. Whatever happens with the economy and the inflation in 2 years, we don't know where we'll be. But these are the people who, if they win, will be in office the next cycle.
Hey, can I glasses half full this? Do you know 3 out of 4 Republicans in our exit poll said that they have confidence that the vote's going to be counted fairly? That
you were surprised by that number.
I was surprised it was that high, and I was sort of relieved, to be frank. Because if we had been sitting in a 50-50
Our exit poll said about 63% thought of all Americans thought that President Biden was legitimately the president.
And more Republicans still do not accept that result. But overall, about these results, 3 and 4 Republicans said that they expected to be counted fairly.
When you look at a state like Arizona, you just mentioned,
which
it's you have a Senate candidate who's an election denier, doubter. You have the governor candidate, same thing. The Secretary of State and the Attorney General. It's not a trifecta. It's a quadfecta.
Sure.
Potentially, if they sweep, and you're talking about a race in Arizona in 2020 that was decided by 11,000 votes.
If you're talking about lawsuits, right, from, let's say, Democrats, if those Republican candidates do win, if you're talking about changes to voting law, for example, or discussions around, I mean, these are the people who are in those decision-making positions. That's why this matters. And Chuck, to your point, I would wonder, do you have any concern? We've seen a little bit here in the exit polling, national versus battleground state split, because we all know, I don't want to get into 2024, but 2024, the president isn't elected by the popular national vote. It's in these battleground states. If it comes down to just a couple of states, right, and we're looking at them.
But Pennsylvania is one big exception here, because from all reports, Doug Mastriano, the gubernatorial candidate, is way behind Josh Shapiro, the attorney general, running against him. And Doug Mastriano, not only an election denier, led all the lawsuits, marched with the rioters on January 6th, but was considered really too extreme by the voters.
Another counterpoint is Brian Kemp in Georgia, who, of course, went to war with Donald Trump over the results in Georgia. He beat a primary challenge, as did the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. So, I mean, it's a mixed bag on this issue.
It is. Look, I want to do a little heat check on the House, because you used the W word, Savannah, and I almost stopped you right there. I'm like, you know what? We don't have evidence of the wave yet. That doesn't mean it might not happen. But let me show you. Remember, I did my small, medium, and large? Well, here's Virginia 10. We already called it. So we're not looking at a tsunami for Republicans. Virginia 7, Abigail Spanberger, obviously, is one that we've been very focused on here. Look at how close this is, just 3,000 votes. And we have some updated totals in here. We think there's still 22,000 votes. So this is one where we're going to wait till all the votes are counted before we call this race. But already, this tells you this may limit the size of the Republican gains, because, look, Florida may give them enough for the majority already. They picked up 4 seats in that state. But this tells you something. And let me take you over to Virginia 2 and explain why we haven't called Virginia 2 yet. Okay, here. And it's simply all of the remaining vote is early vote, okay, and mail vote. So even though it looks like Kiggins has a big lead over Luria, we believe almost all the remaining vote is earlier absentee. And if that decidedly goes Democrats' way, that is why we haven't called that yet. And let me just take you to a few other places very quickly, just to show you my little heat check of where I'm looking at races. Rhode Island 2, this was a race that Republicans were really excited about. They had a great candidate in Alan Fung, and he was not your sort of traditional conservative Republican. This is one that it looks like it's trending. We haven't called it yet, but Magaziner, who is the son of Ira Magaziner, if you remember him during the Clinton administration days, Seth Magaziner, the state treasurer, now running for Congress. The point is, I'm not seeing wave yet.
What about
I'm not saying we
Indiana
won't
1?
see it, but I'm not seeing wave. Let me get you some Indiana 1.
Because that was one of your first early bellwethers.
It was certainly an early bellwether. And, you know, we still got a lot to go here, so we got to wait. But there's not a lot of evidence that Mrvan is going to lose this race. We shall see. But like I said, all of the House returns we've seen so far, outside of the state of Florida, and the state of Florida looks like it is a killing fields for the Democrats, but it didn't spill over outside the state of Florida so far.
It's in the eye of the beholder, though. What is a wave?
Oh, to me, a wave was anything over 20 to 20. In the House,
right.
If they pick up 20 House seats or north, because, you know, they picked up a bunch of House seats in 20 in their defense. They can get to 230 plus actual members of the House. I think you have to say there was at least a bit of a House wave, if you will, one step above Ripple.
Well, you need 5 seats. The Republicans need 5 seats to retake control. They need a Ripple. They need 5 seats to retake control of the House. So, you know, we'll keep our eyes on it. Coming up, what does the vote tonight mean for President Biden?
We'll talk to his former press secretary, Jen Psaki, right after this. As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
Welcome back. It is election night. This is NBC's Decision 2022 election coverage. Let's check in on North Carolina. We are now saying that race is too close to call. An open seat. Longtime Senator Richard Burr retiring. Ted Budd in the lead at this hour, but it is too close to call in North Carolina.
And we have a projection in the Oklahoma governor's race. It looks like the governor, Kevin Stitt, is the incumbent, will win re-election over Joy Hoffmeister, who was a former lifelong Republican.
Well, Chuck has been watching this Oklahoma governor's race very closely, and there is a very fascinating dynamic there.
Well, you know, Stitt wins. That's good news for him, obviously, but there's a new attorney general that's likely to get elected, and he got into a big war with the tribes. It's very possible he could be under some state investigation, the governor, having to do with some campaign contributions, but it all stems from this big fight he seemed to have with the tribes, who spent millions trying to unseat him, both in the primary and the general, and apparently they're not done with him.
Well, Governor Stitt holds on and will serve another term.
Jen Psaki served as President Biden's first White House press secretary. She's now an MSNBC host. Jen, good to have you. Thanks for joining us. So if you're in the White House and you're watching those numbers right now, what does it tell you and what do you do?
Well, whenever you're in the White House and your party's in power, you're always bracing for impact, Lester, because every time a president is in power and there's a midterm election, almost every time that their party loses seats. And if you look back at Barack Obama's first midterm election, he lost 63 seats. He even called it a shellacking. And if you look back at Bill Clinton, he lost 54 seats. So they're aware of that historic precedent. But I will tell you that, and I've been in touch with them, what they're watching right now is the fact that there are races that are turning to be Democratic, where Democrats are winning, that are good signs for them. And it's early. So they're also going to be watching as races start to come in the West Coast as well.
Well, if they're watching the exit polls, Jen, your old boss, President Biden, cannot be happy about one of the results. 2/3 of voters in our exit polls said they do not want President Biden to run for re-election.
That's true, Savannah. I did see that in the exit polls. And look, I think the president has to make a decision early, I think, over the next couple of months to decide if he's going to run for re-election. Now, I will tell you, from having worked for Barack Obama when he was president and he got beaten by a lot in the midterm elections, there were a lot of people calling for him not to run either. So President Biden has to make a decision. He has to decide if he's going to battle through this another time. But I would expect he'll do that with his family and not probably based on exit polls at this point.
Will an announcement by Donald Trump force the president's hand? Make the call sooner rather than later?
You know, Lester, I think it will definitely be a factor because Donald Trump getting in the race will mean that the president will feel like he's the only one who's beaten him before, which is true. And he's probably going to want to take him on again. He's been clear that he wants to run again. He's got to make that decision with his family. And I expect he's going to do that sooner rather than later because he knows time is of the essence. And if he doesn't, other Democrats are, of course, going to get in the race.
I was going to ask you that, Jen, what the timeline is. I mean, obviously, it's a personal decision, a weighty decision. The president is looking at it. But he also, if he is not going to run, wants to leave a lot of running room for other Democratic candidates who might want to get in. What's the general timeline?
You know, I think, Savannah, he knows that the stakes are very high, especially if former President Trump gets in the race. And I think he's going to have some time with his family over the holidays. He'll have those deep discussions. This is a little bit different from past midterms, though, because Democratic candidates were not running against his record. They were running against Barack Obama's record. They're running on his record in many cases, but he does have to make the decision about whether he's going to go through another election cycle at a time when Republicans have been clear that if they take power in the House, they're going to focus on investigations and impeachment. So it's a very personal decision, but I know he knows he needs to make it sooner rather than later, and we'll see. It's a personal one for him.
All right, Jen Psaki, good to have you on.
Great
Thank
to
you.
be here.
Coming up, we're going to have more exit polling from Tom Yamas on how issues like crime and abortion played out in today's vote.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Can you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition. Welcome back to NBC's election night coverage.
Let's get to South Dakota. We got a call there. Kristi Noem, the incumbent governor, will get another term. And we want to go to Tom Yamas now, who's been looking at the exit polls. And we know the big issues have been the economy, crime, abortion. What are you seeing in those exit polls, Tom?
That's exactly right, Savannah. So the Republicans ran on inflation and crime. The Democrats running on threats to democracy and abortion rights. So let's start with inflation and the economy. How did the Republican messaging work here? This is a national exit poll, so all across the country. This is the question. Who do you trust more to handle inflation? 52% said the Republican Party, 44% said the Democratic Party. On the issue of crime, this was the other big one for Republicans. Not a surprise here. 51% of voters said they trust the Republican Party to handle the issue of crime versus 44% for the Democrats. Let's talk about now the issues that the Democrats wanted to run on. The question was the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This is so important, guys. Right now, if you add up dissatisfied and angry, you get about 60% of voters here. So clearly this was on the minds of voters, and we're going to come back to abortion in a second. And then also the other question, democracy in the U.S. today. This one was fascinating, guys. Remember, Democrats ran on this. But look what asked, threatened? Was democracy threatened? 72% of Democrats, but 68% of Republicans. It affected voters in both parties. I mentioned abortion. I want to go to Texas. Look how interesting this is. And again, it's still early in the night. We always want to kind of preface that. But the two top issues in Texas, 28% inflation, 27% in abortion. So many people have talked about Texas maybe eventually becoming purple at some point, still a red state. But guys, with an issue like this, abortion, I know it's early in the night, but that high up in Texas, it could tell us a lot about what's going to happen as we move further out west. Guys, back to you.
All right, Tom.
Thank you. I mean, Hallie, does that match up with what we had been seeing in polls? I kind of remember crime and economy being higher and abortion not being as high on the list for what voters are saying they cared about.
Yeah, I mean, they care about those three things. As Chuck well knows, what we saw from the exit polls and what we're seeing here really matched up with our last NBC News poll, right? So we have been seeing some of this in the polling. I will say, we've all said it, right? Democrats had hoped that enthusiasm around the issue of abortion access was going to get people to turn out. But don't sleep on the crime issue, right? Although what we're seeing from the exits is that abortion does matter to people. I think that if you're a Republican and you're looking at this, you're going, okay, well, let's see how we're going to manage expectations for what they see. I think a lot of Republicans see as a potential House takeover, taking control of the House, given that it is a net flip of just 5 seats, which is not relatively a whole lot. But we've got to also see how it plays out in some of these other states, too, as the polls start to close out west.
And Texas, excuse me, I was just going to say, Texas has the most extreme abortion laws and is the poster child for anti-abortion laws in the country.
All right, we've got more poll closings in just a moment, including all-important Nevada. Hang in there. We'll be back.
This is Decision 2022, Balance of Power on NBC.
And we continue on NBC News Now. I'm Tom Costello in Washington, where we are watching the special decision throughout the night. Right now, we are paying very close attention to the balance of power in the House, where Republicans went into the night hoping to regain control. Some of the most interesting races playing out right now are in Virginia, just across the river from us. It may help tell us if we're looking at a red wave or a ripple, as we've heard throughout the night, from the people on NBC News. Good news for Democrats. NBC News projects incumbent Jennifer Wexton is the winner in Virginia's 10th district. A Wexton loss would have suggested that red wave we've been talking about. In Virginia's 7th district, a very tight race between the Republican, that's Yesli Vega, and the incumbent Democrat Abigail Spanberger. Very tight, and we are not calling that. Add another close one. Virginia's 2nd district between the Democrat Elaine Luria and the incumbent Jen Kiggins. Let's now go to NBC's senior Capitol Hill correspondent, Garrett Haig, who's watching all of this closely. Garrett, Republicans need just 5 House seats to flip the House, 1 Senate seat to flip the Senate. What's the mood like right now at the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy's headquarters?
Tom, it's notable that only McCarthy is having an election night victory party here in D.C. tonight. They thought they would have a lot to celebrate, and I can tell you even now that the music's on and the bar is open, the celebration remains muted here tonight. This idea of a red wave, at least at this hour, has not materialized. You pointed out those Virginia races, the Spanberger race in particular, something of a bellwether for the night. It's one of the most expensive races on the House calendar tonight, and the fact that it's not called, with Spanberger leading at this hour, suggests Republican gains could be smaller than they had hoped for tonight, and indeed even the Democrats had anticipated. That said, they only need so few seats to take control of the House. There's a lot of counting left to be done tonight.
Well, 60% of Americans have an election denier on the ballot, and those deniers seem poised to play a big role in the House if Republicans take the House. How would that influence the way that they govern?
Well, Tom, those deniers may end up having a bigger impact in state-level races, in large part because the way we conduct our elections is driven by state lawmakers. State officials handle election returns in each individual state. In the House, they're going to be limited, especially if Democrats retain control of the Senate. But even if they don't, with Joe Biden's veto pen awaiting, a lot of what we're going to see from House Republicans in the majority would be messaging bills to make their base happy, but that won't become law, and a lot of investigations. And I think that's where you may see the impact of those election deniers, perhaps looking to investigate some of these issues that have animated the Republican, particularly the pro-Trump voters, really going back to the days right after the 2020 election when these election-denying candidates got their start.
Garrett, not a lot of time left, but if they do decide to investigate, for example, Hunter Biden, and that really only has traction within the GOP, that doesn't seem to be a wide appeal issue for the rest of the country.
We've seen this time to time historically, Tom. New majorities come in, they fire up investigations and oversight, and sometimes they overreach. It's the kind of thing that could swing the political winds back in Democrats' favor come 2024. Not that we want to start thinking about that just yet.
Oh, but we can't help ourselves. Garrett, thank you. Garrett Haag. We are going to keep a close eye on all of this through the night. NBC News coverage continues right now. Special coverage, Decision 2022.
Hi, everybody. Great to have you along with us on NBC News for coverage of the 2022 midterm elections. It's been quite a night already.
Yeah, and the polls have just closed in Montana, Nevada. That's a biggie. Utah, although residents in that state vote only by mail. We're just an hour away from poll closings on the West Coast. So why don't we run you through what we have so far in Utah. We're calling that one too early. This is the Utah Senate, too early between Mike Lee and Evan McMullen. Remember, the Democrats didn't put a candidate in this race. They're backing McMullen. This is Nevada, closely watched. The economy, huge issue there. Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat. Adam Laxalt, the Republican, too early to call. And Louisiana Senate, we've got a projection there. John Kennedy will win easily. Re-election for Senate out of Louisiana.
Let's go to North Carolina. This is developing in a fascinating way. We'll talk about it more in a moment, but it's too close to call between Ted Budd and Sherry Beasley for that open Republican seat. Let's talk about Georgia. Too early to call. We expect this to be a long night, long week, perhaps. Maybe we go into December of a runoff if nobody gets to 50%. And in Ohio, we're calling it too early to call right now. J.D. Vance versus Tim Ryan in that Senate race.
All right, Pennsylvania Senate, that still remains too early to call. A fair amount of vote coming in there, but again, too early to call on the John Fetterman Mehmet Oz showdown. The New Hampshire Senate race, too early to call. Maggie Hassan out in front over Donald Bullock, the general, but again, too early to call there. Arizona Senate, that is too early to call as well.
Well, Wisconsin is the same situation. Too early to call there. We've got Ron Johnson looking for another term in the United States Senate up against Mandela Barnes. So let's see where we stand at this hour, 10 o'clock in the East. And we've got Democrats having 40 seats, Republicans 41. It's a 50-50 split going into tonight. So Republicans needing to net just one seat to take control of the United States Senate.
And we're watching a lot of governor's races tonight. Nevada, again, where the polls have closed. Too early to call in that governor's race in Nevada. The New York governor's race, also too early to call. Kathy Hochul, Lee Zeldin,
Hochul looking to do her first full term as governor of New York.
Let's go back to Maine. The governor's race too early to call there. Paul LePage, a former governor, Janet Mills, the incumbent. Too early to call, but we can say that the Democrat, Janet Mills, is leading. And we're saying the same in Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro, the attorney general there, too early to call the race, but he is leading against his opponent, controversial Doug Mastriano, who we just spoke about a few moments ago.
What do you say we go to Jacob Soboroff now? He's at a polling location in Henderson, Nevada. We showed the big races there. It's too early to call, but you've been seeing your camera view a lot of enthusiasm about this election, Jacob.
Lester, honestly, it has not stopped. And last time I talked to you, I think the tally was around 2,000 people had voted at this location. It's up to almost 2,500 on last check. And actually, they were telling me it's quite interesting. You can take the high shot if you want and take a look down at what's going on. Part of the reason that you see kind of a crush of people down here right now is that there were 8 printers that ran out of paper at this location, and they had to call the central warehouse that runs the elections here and had to bring all that paper over here to continue the process because while you vote on electronic machines, all of them are backed up with paper records of what those ballots cast ultimately were. I'd also love to show you, if we have a second, I want you to bring you over here and show you the end of the line, because when I talked to you guys last, I'm pretty sure that the line doubled back twice. Now it looks like it's about 3 times as long as it was before. The line's all the way out to the door, and the folks that are here probably have another at least hour or so to wait. But the important thing to note is that everybody that's in this line right now, and you can see, it almost goes all the way out. This mall is closed right now, so all these people are here after hours. The stores have shut. The arcade around the corner just closed those metal grates that everybody's so familiar with from the mall. But everybody that's in line right now is going to get a chance to vote. And the election administrator here says she thinks it's going to go pretty quickly now that they got all that paper back. Might be another half hour until everyone makes it through the line. Here, you guys.
You talk about something as simple as printing paper. You have to hand it to these poll workers, these volunteers who have taken it on the chin in many ways, in recent months, and to see them out there doing what they do. If you're voting tonight, give them a thanks.
Doing their civic duty, and again, in an environment that's gotten increasingly difficult. So hats off to them. Let's go to Vaughn Hilliard. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona, at the shared headquarters for 2 Republican candidates there. Carrie Lake for Governor, Blake Masters for U.S. Senate. Vaughn, how are they feeling this morning, this evening?
Right. We should note that the first ballots are just dropping here, literally as we speak right now. And I keep refreshing my phone here to see what these results are. But what you should be expecting here from these initial results is the Democrats, the slate of candidates, not only incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, but also Katie Hobbs, the current Secretary of State who is running against Republican Carrie Lake for governor, but also those important Secretary of State and Attorney General races. This initial ballot drop, Democrats need to have a sizable advantage because makes about 60% of the ballots that are going to overall be counted around the state. And what we expect is the late mail ballots that were returned in the last 72 hours, as well as those who voted in person here today, those are going to skew Republican, which is why we saw in 2020 Joe Biden jump out to that significant lead there in that first initial batch, but then Donald Trump closed the gap and almost overcame him, losing by just about 10,500 votes. But this is the race here in Arizona, where we saw back in 2018 with Kyrsten Sinema and 2020 with Mark Kelly and Joe Biden, not only were independents willing, but also conservatives, reticent to Donald Trump, willing to go and vote for Democrats. Here in this longtime conservative state, that was significant. And yet, Republicans, they doubled down by going with Trumpism up and down the ballot in 2022. Blake Masters told me himself this summer that he would have objected to the certification of Joe Biden's win if he had been in the U.S. Senate on January 6, 2021. And then the likes of Mark Finchem for Secretary of State, Abe Hamadeh for Attorney General, and Carrie Lake, each of them have still called for the decertification of the 2020 election. And it's important to note, here in the state of Arizona, all 3 of those statewide officials must certify the election results. That is why there's a lot on the line as we wait for these ballots to drop, and the extent to which Arizona voters are willing to potentially cross back over again here in 2022 for a 3rd cycle and willingly vote for Democrats and really make this state to be taken more seriously, considered to be a purple state for the long run. Guys?
All right, Vaughn, thanks.
Let's go for Chuck Boyd. Talk about a tight race in Georgia. Let's go.
If you want to stare into the abyss of our close election, just watch this. It's just fun to point out 63 votes. Not 6,300. 63 votes are what is separating the two right now. But look at this, 49-49. the Libertarians not getting much, but it may be enough to force the runoff, just what Georgians want. They're going to be like, remember the old SNL skit? Really? Really? We're going to have to do this again? We shall see. We're watching that all night. But I want to take you to the developing story of the night, and it is North Carolina. Look, I showed you, looked like the path to victory for Beasley wasn't there. She wasn't doing well in some of these rural African-American counties. But let me show you where she is doing well, because our models indicate this thing is going to end up being 50-50. We shall wait and see. But I want to show you, she is outperforming, okay? She is, even with Biden in some of these places, she's outperforming Clinton in these bluer counties. And I'll show you here in another place. In Asheville, she's been running ahead of where Biden is by a couple of points. Here in Wake County and Raleigh, look at that. She's been outperforming him. The point is, the blue areas in North Carolina are just simply bluer. And let's see what happens. But I tell you, the pet theory I have is this little Democratic surge, because one of the reasons why our models at first thought, oh, this is going to be a little bit short, is we have made an assumption on, say, Election Day voters. One of the things we're seeing, at least on the East Coast so far, more Democrats voted today than any of the models expected. Some of that could be a little bit of pandemic changing. Some of that simply could have been, oh, maybe I will vote. We're seeing that youth turnout, it looks like it's picking up, at least in the college towns. I'll tell you, I have one name to put out there. Donald Trump had disappeared for the month of October, but this last weekend was all about Trump, Trump, Trump. Single best Democratic get out the vote person in America is Donald Trump.
Hey, Chuck, can you go back to Georgia Senate for a moment? How much of the vote is in?
Oh, well, we still got about 20, I believe it was something like 76%. Yeah, 70. We still got a long way to go, and a long way to get there. Not even a short time to get there.
Okay.
No, we got a long way, and I've been watching this. It bounces back and forth. Right now, the difference is 2,300. It's just sporadic stuff coming in all over. There's no real pattern. This is going to be one where we have to basically see two things. One, will anybody be at 50 or more? But I think this feels like we know where this is headed.
Can we talk about Pennsylvania Senate while you're there?
Yeah, we can. We don't have a lot of numbers for it, but we can. This is a little slower coming in because I want to show you. So far, it appears we don't have as much. Let's see how much Election Day vote. Okay, we're starting to get more Election Day vote. Fetterman's holding his lead, but again, I'm reticent to draw any conclusions in any of these places just yet because we're not even at 50% reporting. I don't want to mislead. And don't forget, we already know Philadelphia's going to take forever to report the vote because of that Republican lawsuit.
Okay, got a couple of results to report to you right now. In Wyoming, we've got a call. The governor there is going to get another term, Mark Gordon, against his opponent, Teresa Livingston. That was not a close race.
All right, let's move over to Nebraska. The governor's race projected winner, Jim Pilon.
And in New Hampshire, it is too early to call, but now we can say that there is the Democrat leading, Maggie Hassan. Many Democrats very anxious about this race, so they'll be happy to see that at this hour. Let's go to Kristen Welker, who is at the White House. Kristen, what are you hearing from your folks there?
Well, Savannah, they're watching what's happening in New Hampshire for one, and they are encouraged by that. And I can tell you the overall mood here right now at this hour seems to be moderately encouraged by some of what they are seeing. President Biden reaching out to some of the winners. Let me tick through who those are. Democratic Governor-elect Maura Healey of Massachusetts, Senator-elect Peter Welch of Vermont, and Governor Jared Polis of Colorado. The other thing that is giving them some measured optimism, and I stress it is measured optimism, are some of the early exit polling, what Tom has been ticking through around the issue of abortion. So they point to that as a potential bright spot when it comes to turnout. It's still obviously very early, so they're not drawing any broader conclusions at this hour. But again, this is a slight shift in tone in terms of the allies of the president that I have been talking to. They say, we're not seeing a blowout. No clear red wave yet. So that is the tone here, and that is the mood here at this hour at the White House.
All right, Kristen, thanks very much.
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, we've got Pennsylvania, we've got Georgia. We are waiting with bated breath. We talked about this.
Spanberger took the lead. Okay, just so you know, I mean, even in the House too. This is developing into a very competitive.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Virginia's Abigail Spanberger, who is a Democrat who was considered to be endangered. Liz Cheney actually endorsed her.
But is there a possibility we don't know who controls the House by the end of tonight?
Everything I'm looking at, and I've been through a lot, and everything we've been looking at, I'd be surprised if we felt comfortable being able to project a definite Republican take over the House tonight, because we just don't have all these West Coast races. In fairness, that doesn't mean they couldn't end up gaining. You know, we saw it took us 3 weeks to get to 40 seats in 2018. We're not saying that, but everything we're seeing on the East Coast, election day voting for Democrats was higher than expected, and that is making our models say, hey, this isn't a done deal yet for the R's.
But what has happened down the stretch that would suddenly bring in a same day?
The big thing to me is Donald Trump. I mean, the big thing that was different this last weekend versus every other weekend in October is that Donald Trump suddenly was front and center, dangling the presidential race and all of this. Again, what else moved? You know, nothing else was moving Democrats, and then this last weekend it shifted. You can't help but ask yourself, because again, when Trump was front and center for the party in August and September, remember, that's when Democrats were talking about, hey, they can hold the House.
We were talking a little bit earlier about events. There are always events leading up to election, but the abortion ruling, Supreme Court ruling, happened in June. The January 6th committee, for the large part, kind of hung up their
July,
the public part of the investigation. So how much does that weigh in when you look at events sometimes that cause things?
Lester,
but what about the other side?
The Pelosi attack. I threw that on the list
Pelosi
too.
attack, sure.
Let's not underrate that.
We know that people. When do people start caring about who they're going to vote for in the midterms? Like right before the midterms, right? So while there was enthusiasm generated for I think some of those events you talked about for Democrats, I think Chuck's onto something here when you talk about the Donald Trump factor this past weekend. Because sure, there had been discussion of people urging him to wait until after the midterms to make any announcement of 2024, and technically he is waiting. But take North Carolina for example here. When you look at the Trump factor, by the way, he's got an event at Mar-a-Lago. He's about to take the stage down at Mar-a-Lago right now. He endorsed Ted Budd in the primaries, right? That's what got Ted Budd over the hump in a pretty competitive Republican primary in this North Carolina very competitive Senate race we're talking about, too. Look at those numbers, not where Republicans thought they'd be.
Donald Trump owns the Senate
When you talk about abortion, one of the criticisms that has been made against the Democrats in these closing weeks is that they spent so much money on the abortion issue right after the Dobbs decision came down, which was way too early, and then did not have an early response on inflation when gas prices started going up, when they got behind the curve on the economy. And there was a lot of criticism of the Democratic Party for doing exactly that. Most people will be wondering what brought out the vote. Tight polls will do it too, when people feel like there's something at stake and their vote counts. And we certainly saw razor-thin margins in a lot of state polls. As we go to break, as mentioned, Donald Trump speaking right now, actually, at an event in Mar-a-Lago, taking the stage. We will be back with more of our coverage of the 2022 midterm elections coming up.
here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world. Because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back to election night. Let's get to some results. We're looking at this race very, very closely. The Georgia Senate race now being characterized as too close to call. Since we just saw a 64-vote margin a few minutes ago, I think that seems appropriate.
748.
Okay, so we're at 748. It's too close to call.
Yeah. All right, in the Illinois Senate, Tammy Duckworth,
Re-elected for another term as a senator from Illinois. And here's where the Senate stands at this hour, 41-41.
Let's go to Illinois' governor race. We can project that J.B. Pritzker will win another term, easily cruising to re-election in Illinois. In Wisconsin, a hotly contested governor's race, too close to call. The incumbent Tony Evers trying to hang on against his opponent, Tim Michaels. And I see that Chuck's getting his steps in. He's over at the board. We've been watching this race all night. The 7th District in Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, the incumbent, trying to hold on.
If you recall, I said, hey, be careful. The last votes are going to be blue the closer you get to Washington. Literally, Virginia is one of those. The vote count literally comes in south to north throughout the state. And that's what's happened here. She's taken the lead. The remaining vote, we believe, is mostly in Prince William. That is a bluer area of this district. So, look, this is one of the reasons why we don't feel good about saying we know exactly which party is going to control the House. This really is one of those tipping point districts. It is still possible Republicans, because of redistricting failures by Democrats in New York and successes in Florida, they'll find the 5 seats that they need. But this is what we're staring at here in the House. And again, Election Day vote. And we still haven't called Luria. And the simple reason is all of the remaining vote appears to be early vote. And so we want to be careful there. But I'll tell you, I've been dancing around all of our competitive House races here a little bit. And I just, everywhere you go, Democrats are holding their own. Ohio won. This would be a pickup, knocking off a Republican incumbent. Now, this is Cincinnati. Hamilton County became a bit bluer of a district. But, right now you look at many of these. This is another one that we expected to be competitive. Democrats are holding up there. I want to take you to the state of Iowa. Where did Iowa 3 go? We've seen she's hanging in there. This is one Republicans that almost counted on this one being already in their column. So, look, it's across the board so far. Democratic performance in these House races a little bit better, and looks like it's because of Election Day voters.
All right, Chuck, we'll continue to watch it as that story develops. Much more ahead on this dramatic election night on NBC.
with the latest city turned crime scene. We see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
All right, let's take a look at the Iowa governor's race right now. And NBC News projects that Kim Reynolds will win another term in that race.
Let's bring in Brendan Buck. He served as a top advisor to the last two Republican House Speakers, Paul Ryan and John Boehner. Hi, Brendan. Been there, done that. We know that. How are you feeling about the results we've seen so far in the House?
Yeah, it's clear that Democrats are coming out. They're not sitting this one out, which is great. We are a very polarized country. We're a very closely divided country, and clearly Democrats are engaged just like Republicans. I still think this is going to be a good night for Republicans. I still think they are going to take the House, and Kevin McCarthy is going to be the next speaker. I think we don't need a big night, right? We were very successful in 2020. Only need 5 seats to take back the majority. Only need, I would say, maybe 15 for a healthy governable majority, and that still seems very on track. There are about 12 seats where Democrats retired in